It was a calm Friday evening when my wife, Lisa, and I decided to take a road trip through the secluded mountain roads of Idaho. We were longing for a break from our usual routine, hoping this spontaneous journey would help us relax. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the expansive landscape as we navigated the winding roads, miles away from the city's bustle. As we ventured deeper into the mountains, the trees grew denser and the air turned colder. The further we drove, the quieter everything seemed. There were no signs of civilization, no other cars in sight. Lisa became quieter as well, her gaze fixed on the window, her face marked with unease. "What's wrong?" I asked, concerned. She hesitated before replying, "I don't know. Something feels off here." I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just the isolation, but deep down I wasn't sure either. The road seemed endless, surrounded by towering trees that now appeared to close in on us. Then, we saw a small, run-down cabin standing alone in a clearing. Its windows were dark and empty, and something about it felt unnatural. Lisa looked at it, intrigued but hesitant. "Should we stop for a bit?" she asked. We pulled over, stretching our legs. The chill in the air made me shiver. Lisa pointed at the cabin. "Do you think anyone lives there?" Before I could respond, I saw something or someone standing in the doorway. A tall figure staring at us, motionless. I couldn't make out any details, but those eyes, they felt like they were looking right through us. "Did you see that?" Lisa whispered, voice trembling. I nodded, feeling an unease I couldn't shake. "We should go back to the car." As we turned to leave, a low, guttural growl echoed from behind us. I froze, my heart pounding. We both turned around, but the figure was gone. The wind howled, and the forest was eerily silent. Lisa's grip tightened on my arm as we hurried back to the car. I started the engine, but it stalled. I cursed under my breath, trying again, but the car wouldn't start. Then, I saw him. The figure was standing in front of the car now, closer. His face was pale, eyes wide and unblinking. He didn't move. "Drive!" Lisa screamed, her voice shaking. I threw the car into reverse, slamming the gas pedal. The car jerked forward and we sped away. The figure didn't move, but I felt his presence. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town. I pulled into a gas station, trying to steady my nerves. Lisa was still trembling, her face pale. What was that?" she asked softly. I didn't have an answer. Whatever it was, it didn't want us there. We never spoke of it again, but the memory lingered. That road, that cabin, those eyes, they stayed with us, and I knew something had followed us back. We weren't alone anymore. They call it the Whispering Woods, a stretch of highway slicing through dense forest in northern Idaho. Truckers talk of strange occurrences there, lost time, ghostly figures, and eerie whispers. Charlie Doyle, a no-nonsense trucker, brushed it all off as superstitious nonsense until he drove through it one fateful night. Charlie had a midnight delivery of industrial equipment. His route, as directed by his dispatcher, took him straight through the Whispering Woods. It was a shortcut, saving 2 hours off his trip, and he wasn't one to back down from a challenge. The first few miles were uneventful. The towering pines pressed close to the road, their branches forming an almost impenetrable canopy that blocked the moonlight. His high beams barely cut through the thick darkness, and the forest felt alive, shifting in the shadows. Around 1 a.m. the radio crackled, but it wasn't music or chatter. It was a faint voice, whispering his name. "Charlie." Startled, he glanced at the CB radio, but it was off. He shrugged it off as static interference, gripping the wheel tighter. A mile later, a figure darted across the road. Charlie slammed on the brakes, his rig screeching to a halt. Heart pounding, he peered into the woods but saw nothing, just shadows. He restarted the truck and drove on, but unease settled over him. The whispers grew louder, indistinct at first, then clearer. "Turn back, Charlie, turn back." Sweat beaded on his forehead. He reasoned it away. His CB must picked up a rogue frequency, or maybe he was overtired. But then, the headlights flickered. The truck stalled to a stop, the engine dead. Charlie cursed, stepping out into the cold, damp air. He grabbed his flashlight and opened the hood, inspecting the engine. Everything seemed fine. That's when he heard a soft rustling in the trees, followed by faint laughter. It was high-pitched, almost childlike. He spun around, his flashlight sweeping the dark forest, but saw nothing. "Who's out there?" he called, his voice echoing. No answer, just more laughter. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw them figures standing between the trees. Pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes reflecting the beam of his flashlight. They didn't move, just stared. Charlie's breath hitched. "This isn't real," he muttered, backing toward the truck. The whispers surrounded him now, overlapping voices in an indecipherable chant. He scrambled back into the cab, locking the doors. The truck's interior felt oppressively small, the whispers louder than ever. His hands trembled as he turned the key, praying the engine would start. It roared to life, and relief washed over him. But as he looked in the rearview mirror, his blood turned to ice. A woman sat in the passenger seat, her head tilted unnaturally to the side. Her skin was gray, her lips cracked, and her eyes black voids. "Turn back," she hissed, her voice cutting through the whispers. Charlie screamed, swerving the truck violently. The cab shuddered as it veered off the road, crashing into a ditch. When he opened his eyes, the woman was gone. Dazed, Charlie climbed out of the wreckage, stumbling onto the road. A low rumble of an engine approached. Another trucker pulled over, his face pale as he stepped out. "You're lucky," the man said, helping Charlie up. "Most who see them don't make it out." Charlie didn't ask what he meant. He didn't need to. The haunted stretch of whispering woods was behind him, but the whispers never left. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard them calling his name, warning him to stay away from the darkness. It was meant to be a typical road trip, a way for Jake and Emily to escape their daily routines. They had no set destination, just the open road and miles of freedom. As they drove down a lonely highway in the middle of nowhere, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. After a few hours, the car's radio began to pick up strange static, followed by distorted voices. At first, Jake assumed it was just interference, but the voices grew clearer. They whispered names, his and Emily's. "Jake, Emily, turn back." "Easy," Emily urged Jake to pull over, but he shrugged it off. "Just a trick of the mind," he said, trying to keep things light. But as they passed an old, abandoned gas station, Emily's stomach clenched. It felt out of place, as if it belonged to another era, and there was something about it that made her skin crawl. They stopped for a quick break, but as Emily stepped out of the car, she noticed an old man sitting by the gas station, staring at them without blinking. His eyes were unsettlingly wide, and he didn't seem to move at all. "Don't stay out here too long," he whispered hoarsely. "The road doesn't like visitors." Jake laughed nervously, urging Emily back into the car. They got back on the road, but the atmosphere had changed. The air felt heavier, suffocating. No other cars passed by, and the only sound was the hum of the tires on the pavement. Suddenly, the car's headlights flickered, and the road ahead shifted. The signs blurred, and the trees twisted unnaturally. Emily's heart raced as they approached a fork in the road, one that had never been there before. Without warning, the car stalled, and in the distance, figures moved in the shadows. Too many, too fast. The whispers grew louder, echoing in their ears. The figures closed in, and all they could hear was the old man's warning, "You should have turned back." It started as a simple road trip. Sarah, Jake, and Mia packed the car with snacks, maps, and a sense of adventure, ready to explore the vast, empty highways of the Midwest. They aimed to reach the remote Echo Pines campground before sunset, famous for its haunting beauty. But things rarely go as planned. As dusk settled, the GPS cut out, forcing them to rely on an old paper map. They chose what they believed was a shortcut, a narrow, cracked road lined with thick woods. The trees stretched on forever, their shadows clawing at the edges of the headlights. An hour passed, and their discomfort deepened. They hadn't seen another car or house, only the dark forest closing in on them. Then, like a lifeline in the darkness, a flickering neon light appeared ahead, a gas station. The station looked ancient, its paint peeling and the sign hanging by a single rusty chain. Yet, it was their only hope. Jake parked the car near the single pump, and they stepped out into the eerie silence. Inside, a bell above the door jingled weakly as they entered. The air smelled of mildew and something metallic. The shelves were sparsely stocked, lined with outdated cans and dusty snack bags. Behind the counter sat an old man with deep-set eyes and a face like crumpled paper. "Lost?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. "Just need directions," Sarah said, forcing a smile. The old man stared for a moment too long before nodding. "Echo Pines, huh? Not far. But you shouldn't be driving this late. Things roam at night." Jake chuckled nervously. "We'll be fine. Thanks." As they turned to leave, the man added, "Keep to the main road. Don't stop for anything." and if you hear it, don't look back." His words clung to them like smoke as they returned to the car. Jake shook his head, dismissing the warning as backwoods superstition. 10 minutes later, they were back on the road. The forest grew darker, the air heavier. Then came the sound, a low, guttural growl, faint at first but growing louder. It seemed to echo from the trees, following them. "Did you hear that?" Mia whispered, her voice trembling. Jake tightened his grip on the wheel. Just an animal. But the growl turned into a piercing screech, chilling and inhuman. The car's headlights flickered, and suddenly, the engine sputtered to a halt. "No, no, no," Jake muttered, twisting the key in vain. Sarah's breath hitched as she looked outside. Shadows seemed to move between the trees, too fast and too tall to be animals. "Stay inside," Jake commanded, though his voice quivered. But then came the knock. A soft, deliberate tap on Mia's window. She turned slowly, and her scream froze in her throat. A face stared back, a pale, gaunt face with hollow eyes and a jagged, too wide grin. "Drive," Mia shrieked. The car roared to life, just as the thing pressed its bony hands against the glass. Jake slammed the gas pedal, and they tore down the road, the creature's eerie laughter ringing in their ears. They didn't stop until they reached a motel hours later, trembling and pale. But when Jake handed over his credit card, the clerk frowned. "That's strange," she said. "This card was reported stolen 5 years ago." The three friends froze, their minds racing. Jake pulled out his wallet and found a driver's license that wasn't his. The photo was of him, only older, with hollow eyes and a crooked grin. They ran, leaving everything behind. They never spoke of the trip again, but none of them could shake the feeling that the gas station remained, its neon light flickering in the endless night, silently luring travelers into the unknown.